before I do that, doing what I do, I get to go to a lot of events, and I just want to say something, having gotten all the emails and preparation stuff to be a moderator for this. We should all pause for a second and say thank you to Eileen from Miami-Dade and Greg from Broward and Valerie from Palm Beach County, because this is the best organized event of its kind I've ever attended. So thank you all. Let's see, do we have John and Dan and Viktoriya ready? Let's bring them up. Well, so this session is about the power of examples. And one of the things I've learned as an urban designer and town planner is that you can describe the theories, you can have the books, even the manuals, and there's nothing like taking your elected officials to a place and letting them see it with their own eyes, the makings of a dramatic before and after picture. I'm a town planner and urban designer. I'm a little bit obsessed with streets, so a lot of my questions for you all might go in that exact direction. And for those who are not usually in West Palm Beach, I want you to be sure you walk over to Clematis Street. I got to lead the design team on the makeover of Clematis Street here in downtown West Palm Beach. A few years ago in Miami-Dade, one of the planning directors was getting pestered by me with questions like the ones you're hopefully already typing in Slido. And finally, about why we weren't doing this kind of planning and doing that kind of planning. And we all live in an unpredictable universe, but he turned to me and in frustration he said, "Victor, we can't plan yet because we don't know what's going to happen." Let that sink in. We in this room actually get to have a big influence on what does happen, and that's why I want to introduce you to contestant number one, contestant number two, and contestant number three in the dating game here. We're going to start with John Bauters, who is known as America's bike mayor. He's an elected official, the former mayor of Emeryville, California. We know him nationally because of his interest in safe streets, because he's a communicator, as you're about to see, and because he leads on true multimodal choices. And then right after that, we're just going to go straight into Viktoriya Wise, who is the director of streets at SFMTA, that's San Francisco's Municipal Transportation Agency. She oversees 2,000 employees, and they're responsible for all the improvements to San Francisco's streets and transit and bicycle and pedestrian and parking infrastructure. So I think we'd like to hear from you, Viktoriya, about streets and economics and equity. And then we get to hear from one of our Florida heroes, Dan Burden, the Johnny Appleseed of walkable communities, back in Florida. In 1980, then Governor Graham appointed him one of the nation's first state bike and pedestrian coordinators, back before anybody knew what that was. And he kind of invented the title and then invented a job to go with it. And in the process, made our State Department of Transportation one of the first ones in the country to try to be focused on multimodal and complete streets. We know we have a long way to go, but the beginning of that journey started with this guy. So for 45 years, Dan's been helping people experience and then build livable communities. In 2014, he was recognized by the White House as a champion of change in transportation. Yay, Dan. Yeah. Type your questions into Slido, and I'll keep track of them, and we'll hit them with the hardest ones right after Dan finishes. And with that, John Bauters.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. And thank you so much to Valerie and the TPA board and everybody for inviting me all the way from the left coast of America to come over here and speak with you this evening. I wanted to pick up on something. I get to do events like this more frequently than I ever thought I would, and I get to see Veronica Davis my share of times, and every time I learn something new, and I just want to pick up on something she said near the end that is going to really summarize what I'm going to go through in my presentation, which is, it is not just electing good people, it's that symbiotic relationship with professional staff. So I know there's only a handful of elected officials in the room, and many of you are partners, you're in the public sector, you're in the private sector, you're doing something from an engineering perspective. But I want to actually, this is really for you, And I really want to just plant a few seeds. I'm going to go through a handful of examples, as I was asked to do, about what we've done in our community. But it's really not just show and tell. It's planting the seed about how did we get there and the culture change that made it possible. Because if you were to look at me and say, well, this guy just did all this, which is what a lot of people think, I did not do this alone. I did this with partners in the private sector, on our staff in public works and transportation, and with the community. So it's really important to think about those things, and I'm going to guess the green button is my friend. No. How do we advance it? Oh, it did up there. Down there it's not. Okay, there we go. All right. So just a little bit on Emeryville, California. So if you were to tell me 10 years ago that I would become America's bike mayor, I would think you were crazy. My full-time job, I represent sexual assault victims as an advocate. So I work in social services. I help people who've had the worst thing in their life probably happen to them navigate their life from that point forward. Being the mayor of Emeryville, California was literally, as Ms. Davis said, not something I needed to do. It was literally like, I just want to serve my community. So it's weird to be recognized as one of the 50 most influential people on bicycle policy, because everything I'm about to tell you is not genius. I don't own it and I didn't create it. But somehow I was able to do it. Emeryville, California is a small urban city of just about 1 square mile, to give you context of what you're going to see here in a minute. It's situated between Oakland and Berkeley in a county of about 2 million people, the smallest town in the county. But we punch way above our weight class, as we say we're the mightiest little city in California. And we have become an internationally recognized city for our work on advancing multimodal and safe street policies. So I'm going to just show you kind of 4 examples of things that we've done that I think, this thing doesn't like me. Oh, you got me. Okay, thank you. Show you some things. This, just so you know, the screen down here is not changing, just so you know. Okay. So just show you some things that we've done that are going to be illustrative of what it is that I think everybody here in Florida can and do. So the first one here you see is Doyle Street. The Doyle Street project. Doyle Street's a street that runs north to south. It's between 2 arterial streets, and it was between a residential neighborhood and a business community. It's all stop signs. There's a YMCA, a middle school, parks and playgrounds, and it was a classic place for people to speed through the neighborhood as a way of getting around traffic lights. And at the beginning of COVID, we had it in our plan for a long time that we were going to do something about making Doyle Street a calmer, more residential neighborhood. So the very first thing that we did with this project was, when COVID began, we sat down as a transportation committee, which I chaired in the city, and we said we should actually use this everyone stay at home kind of rule to go out and turn some streets into something else. You probably had that here as well. And we literally, in a safe distance manner, door knocked all of Doyle Street and told people we want to actually take cars off of Doyle Street and fulfill the vision of this being a pedestrian and bicycle prioritized route. We're going to actually close streets to traffic, and when we do that, we're going to take away your parking, we're going to take away all these other things, you know, that's the thing that you're losing, but this is what you're going to get. And we just did that hand-to-hand, that person-to-person kind of conversation, and it really got us to a point where we did a pilot program first, and within 90 days, we saw this massive increase in the number of people choosing to walk and bike on Doyle Street. Within 6 months, we got a grant from the state and the county to turn it into a permanent project, and before 1 year of COVID had passed, we had a complete, fully designed and approved and constructed project that won Cal Bike's award for the quickest build permanent project that was done during COVID. One of the things that we talk about a lot in our community is safety. If you ask the American public what they think about climate change, is climate change real? 90% of Americans will tell you it's real. 90% of them will tell you it's caused in whole or in part by human behavior. And almost all those people think that we have a responsibility to do something about it. If you ask that same group of people, would you give up using your car for a trip of 1 mile or less? Less than 20% of people are willing to do that. There is a disconnect in the narratives between why we say we're doing things and what people's actual behaviors and willingness is. The one thing that everybody cares about is their safety. So in our situation, while there are many narratives that are true, the only narrative we have ever used to advance projects in our city is safety. So one of the things that we identified as a priority for our community was the most vulnerable community members need to be made safe first. So in 2019, we undertook a project where we said, why do we take all of our money, repave our streets every so many years, we have a street paving program, and then we have a separate item in our capital plan for active travel implementation. So we combine them into something called sustainable streetscapes, and every time we go to repave a street, we build the entire active travel plan on that street. So within 15 years, the city's entire active travel plan will actually be constructed because we have it as part of the paving plan. So when we set out to do that the first year, we decided to choose all the streets that were within a 2-block radius of all of our schools. We did not know when we did that. We did that simply because statistics showed children were more likely to be hit or killed within 2 blocks of a school. When we did that, we did not realize that we were actually engaging in a complete culture change. So this image is a really interesting story. We put in, this is an elementary school in our city, and we removed the parking lane to put a double directional protected cycle track facility on that street, and an adjacent street goes through the neighborhood back to people's homes, okay? I get an email from a parent. Dear Mayor, what the heck is wrong with you? I went to go pick up my daughter after the Christmas vacation, and the lane of traffic that everybody queues in typically on the street, just to be clear, is gone. You've moved the parking lane out, and you have this weird bike facility there. Did you even have a civil engineer with a license design this thing? And then coming down the street, there were these weird concrete islands out in the intersection. Why are those there? I had to come to an almost complete stop to make the right turn onto 41st Street. I now have to go to the back of the school and queue with the other parents in the parking lot to pick up my kids. Did you even bother to ask parents what we thought about this? Signed, Angry Parent. Dear parent, thank you so much for your email. What you've encountered is called a protected intersection. I'm so glad to hear it works as it was designed. Yes, Mohammed is a licensed civil engineer, and that protected intersection and bike facility are there to make your child safe and all of their little classmates safe. Because the priority in this town is that every child lives a full and healthy life. I don't ever want to be the mayor who has to install a teddy bear memorial or a ghost bike in front of a school to tell all of that child's classmates and friends, you go to school in a dangerous community. I am never going to do that. So I hope you enjoy the protected intersection and the bike path. Maybe you should try it. If you have any further questions, please write back. Nobody ever writes me back. My staff kept all the emails. They're like, we're going to make a book out of your emails. But it's a really important point in talking with the community and helping them get away from their mindset of convenience and the inconvenience of things and putting them in a mind frame of, this is about safety. He's thinking about my safety. So here's the fun fact about this school. The following year, September, the principal calls me and says, Mayor, would you please come and meet me at the school? I have to talk to you about your bike project. I thought, oh my God, we're going to do this again? So I show up at the school, and I go out, and she's out the front, and people are biking up to the school, parents and kids, all these kids with bikes. And she's like, yeah, you did this thing, didn't you? I said, I did. She's like, I have a problem. I said, what's that? She's like, come with me. She opens the front door of the school, and the hallways are lined with bicycles. She said, last year we had 12 to 15 kids who used bicycles. This year we have 60 to 70 kids who bike to school. Can you please build some bike racks out front so our hallways can actually be used for class movement? So we came the following week and we installed new bike racks. It's interesting how the problem isn't really the problem. It's the solutions keep building on the solutions. So, next slide. There we go. So I'm not going to tell all these stories, but these are just examples of, we put the protected paths around all the schools. That's at the high school. We built a full trail, rail-to-trail, in our community that is not coming up on the slides. I don't know why the slides don't like me. There you go, rail-to-trail. So we actually finished a complete greenway through our whole city, north to south. Our first year, we put a bike tracker up. We had 380,000 people in a 1 square mile city in the first year. In the second year, it was 600,000 people. 600,000 rides on our greenway. If you build it, they will use it. But if you can't wait for people to be on the road to decide to put the bike lane, like, you have to give them the choice to choose to move differently. So a couple other examples I'm going to give. So this is a building that's a paint factory. It was a paint factory. It was an emulsion paint factory, a 10-acre site. And the mentality I brought as a leader was, my line was, why not? And we had a bike boulevard that dead-ended into a T intersection at Horton Street. And there was this huge, long building. And on the back side of it, we were building a community park, a playground, a garden, all these amenities were going to go into this project. And so I said to the developer, I'd like you to put the bike path through your building, a 1931 paint factory building. And legitimately looked at me and was like, are you crazy? And I was like, probably. But I'd like to put the bike path through the building. And the city staff were like, I don't know if you can, like, really, you want to do that? I was like, 100%. Like, they do it in the Netherlands. I'm like, what, like, why can't we put a bike path through a building? Where's the vision of giving people the interesting opportunity to actually take their bike down a known bike route, and instead of having to figure out how to navigate around a large project that's being built, they can literally go through this building into a city park. So that's what it looks like when it was finished. And that's what you bike, the next one, hold on, that's what you bike into now. So I put a video, the day we opened it, I put a video online of me biking through it. We had bike communities coming from Seattle, Portland. People came down just to film themselves biking through a building to tell people, like, you can actually just, like, go through buildings in Emeryville on your bicycle, and you discover the park, and just people felt like they were discovering their community differently. We have hundreds of people in this park every weekend. They come from cities all over the Bay Area, and it changed the economy of our community. It changed the way our community felt about itself. We had people say, I feel like I live in a real neighborhood. I feel like I live, in a community that, like, I would go visit on vacation. It changed the culture of what we do, and with that, we started to change the minds of staff, going from, well, here's all these technical reasons why we can't do it. We moved into a space where, why not? And so I'm going to end with these last two slides, which is one of the things that you also have to do is you have to have the courage to call out what's not working and to be really upfront about, like, how you can be better. So I was sitting at a bus stop and I saw this man, there you see, with a cane leaning on a trash can across the street, and I thought, he's got a bag, why doesn't he just sit down? And then I was like, where's the seating? So I get on the bus going in the opposite direction. I noticed all the bus stops on the other side of 40th Street had no bus seats. So I called it out. I was like, we need to fix this. I go to the transportation committee. That's taken in March. I go to the transportation committee meeting. I say, I want this, bus seats. They said, well, this and that, whatever. I was like, listen, why not? Like, why not just do it? Well, do you want to do a study? The public may want to pick the color. I was like, the color is green. The study is done. I was like, people have been putting their butts in benches for years. We know that they like to do that. I don't know what else there is to study about that. Let's just put the benches out. Within 9 months, every bus stop in our city had benches. And we got an award from AARP folks, the aging community, we're just like, now I see people sitting and using the benches, riding transit at stops that never had people at them before. And so it kind of became this game, which was like, well, what is he going to do next year? So the following year, we put a bike rack at every intersection. Literally every year, we sat down as a team and just said, why not? It's a 1 square mile town. It can have everything it wants if it wants to. And so my time is up, but I just want to encourage you to think outside the box, work hand in glove with your elected officials. If they seem scared or you feel like, oh, it's not in the MUTCD, all that stuff, like, ask yourself, why not? Because a lot of the reasons why we don't make the progress we could make is because we put barriers in front of ourselves. Thanks.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so happy to be here with you today. and share a little bit of what San Francisco has been doing for some time. But before I do that, oh, there we go. Let's see. How are we? What's happening? There we go. Thank you so much. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about why does safety matter? That's been the whole conversation here today. And it matters because our streets, next slide please, is not just for transportation. Our streets are for connection, are for getting together, for building communities, right? That's the theme that we've heard from everybody today. And it is also for our physical well-being and for our mental well-being, because so much loneliness and isolation is happening in our society right now. So our streets are an opportunity for us to get together. Next slide, please. We've gone through that advance. Let's see. Yep, but I can't see what's coming. It's somebody else's presentation, so there's a little bit of I'll just talk. And we'll just do our best. So, next slide after that, please. Thank you so much. You know why else it's important, safe streets are important? Because the reality is many of our jurisdictions are growing, and they are growing fast. San Francisco is having a housing crisis, and we are trying to build more housing. But if you look at this slide right here, and this is just from January 2025, San Francisco is the second most congested city in the United States, bested only by New York. And by the way, Miami is not too far behind, right? And so I'm trying to work to give opportunities to my citizens to have alternative modes of transportation, because I can't grow. I simply have no more space on my roadway to grow. And so I need to be able to be giving people choices so that they can take transit, they can go by bus, of course by a rail, but by bike and by walking. That's important too. So I'm trying to solve for having incredible streets with lots of joy. That's an important word, right? And to also economically grow and support my region, support my city, and not die in congestion, and to give people choices at the end of the day. So if you want to go to the grocery store, you can go ahead, you can drive, but you can also go ahead and take your cargo bike. All right, next slide, please. So, I got some tools up my sleeve that I want to talk with you guys about and share what San Francisco is doing in terms of corridor projects, intersection improvements, and speed management. Very important. Next slide, please. But you wouldn't be surprised that San Francisco is a data-driven city, right? After all, we are very close to Silicon Valley. So, as very first adopters, one of the very first adopters of Vision Zero in the nation, we also mapped our high injury network, and this is the 12% of streets where 68% of fatalities and injuries occur. And those are the blue lines you see on this map. And what you also see in yellow are my equity communities. And so this map is driving where I make investments in my city. It is how I make choices about where to do important transportation projects. Next slide. So, tools in my toolbox. Let's start with corridor projects real quick. I have 4 different kinds, next slide please, that we do. One is, next slide, yep, thanks. We do real quick demonstration projects, and those could be just like a day or 60 days, maybe a couple months, because we want to let people try them out. A lot of community outreach that we talked about in our afternoon keynote speaker, that, you go to where the people are. That's true. But you know what else you do? You put things on the ground and you let them see it, you let them try it out, and then you go out there and ask how it's working for them. We do lots of pilots, very similar idea to that. And then we do quick builds. Those are my favorite, and I'll give you some examples of those in just a minute. And then, of course, capital projects. You all know what's up with those. Next slide. Why quick build projects? Why are we so focused on those? Well, here's 2 pretty similar streets in South of Market of San Francisco, 2nd Street and 5th Street, and we did very similar treatments with that. So we did a protected bike lane, and we changed signal timing, and we reallocated road space, essentially a road diet, right? And on 5th Street, we did it for $1.6 million pretty darn quickly, and on 2nd Street, it was over $20 million bucks. Now, granted, the Capitol Streetscape project is nicer. You can see it has some landscaping, and it has a protected bike lane, not just with soft hit posts, it's with concrete, so that's important. But what I'm doing in the city is doing lots of quick builds, because we gotta move fast, safety is key, and then reinforcing them over time with more intensive capital projects. So let me give you a couple examples. Next slide. Battery was, back one. All right, Battery was a really good example where we did a protected, well, okay, I'm gonna skip to Golden Gate Avenue. This is a really great project because it was in our Tenderloin community. And our Tenderloin community is a community of low income, immigrant folks with lots of kids. It is our equity priority community. And so we did a protected bicycle lane, and we actually allocated roadway space for institutions like churches and social services to provide services to folks that live there. This is an incredible project that really didn't take much. As you can see, it's just some paint, soft hit posts, but it was really successful because what we saw is an increase in people biking. John said it, if you build it, they will come, and it's true. And I'm just not saying it, I have data to back that up. Next slide. This is another one, Goodlet Place. If you guys have been to San Francisco, you might know that this is our city hall. This is in front of our most important civic institution. And what we did here is a parking protected bike lane, some pedestrian safety zone improvements, and some curbs to slow down those right turning vehicles as bicycles are coming down the street. We got to slow down the turning movement and really reduce those conflicts. I don't have quite data on how this worked out yet and whether it's increased ridership because I just put this in November. You can see the paint is fresh. All right, next slide. Next thing up my sleeve in a toolbox is intersection improvements. Next slide. This is our Vision Zero 2021 action strategy. Similar slide to before, just updated high injury network, again with our equity communities, and this is where I'm making most of my intersection improvements. Next slide. And what I have in my toolkit is a whole bunch of stuff that's familiar to you. Daylighting, longer walking times, advanced limit lines, turn calming, my favorite. I'll talk to you about that in just a second. Give an example, and a whole bunch of other tools. And you know what we've done in San Francisco? We have put most of these improvements on our high injury network at over 900 intersections. And by this spring, I would have done these improvements at my entire high injury network in the city. And honestly, my city traffic engineer is amazing, and the team. Credit goes to them. I want to show you a couple pictures, couple slides, just as examples. You all are familiar with this, but it's good to look at. Look at my Conti crosswalk. Nope, go back, not quite. My Continental crosswalk right here, and a painted safety zone, and right here, the red curb, the daylighting. By the way, California just passed a daylighting law requiring all jurisdictions to have daylighting at the corners throughout our entire state. So I'm scrambling to figure out how I'm gonna paint 14,000 intersections with a curb red, but that's for another day. But we want to make sure that pedestrians are visible, and what we also observed is sometimes vehicles double park and they encroach on that space, so we put up some soft hit posts to make sure people don't do that, make sure folks can see pedestrians stepping onto the crosswalk. Next slide, please. We also we work on traffic lights, signal heads. People can't see them, so we've changed them out from 8 inches to 12 inches. We're putting up mast arms. It's critical that folks see the lights as they're driving, because some of our most important crashes happen when people run red lights. That's when people die. That's the statistics in the city. Speed is number one why people die, and I'll get to that in a minute. But running a red light is a close second behind, so we're upgrading our traffic infrastructure as well. Next slide. All right, left turn safety upgrades. Well, you can see right here a very simple intervention, right? It's just rubber that we screwed into the concrete to make those left turns slow down just a little bit, to not have the people take that turn at 15 miles an hour or more, which they do, so pedestrians can be seen. Next slide. We did that in quite a few locations, and we studied it. Please, it's actually not coming up quite right, but we advanced that. Yeah, there we go, and one more. And so we paired what we're doing on the ground with an education campaign. Those go hand in hand. You got to do that so the people understand that when they're seeing the stuff on the ground, this is why it's important. So we did billboards, bus ads, digital campaigns, things on our street lights, so that when people encountered something new that they'd never known before, they understand why we're doing it. Next slide. Next, speed management, very important. Next slide, please. I know you all have seen this slide. I know you all understand why speed matters. It is the #1 cause in San Francisco of fatalities and injuries. I have to manage speed in my town. Next slide. So, what I've been doing is focusing on kids and focusing on our elderly. Y'all hear a theme today? Yeah, it's about our children and it's about the elderly folks. And so we changed the speed limit to 15 miles an hour at all of our schools in San Francisco, K through 12, all 200 of them within 500 feet. And then we went and looked at where our senior communities are, and we changed and lowered the speed limit to 25 miles an hour. And we paired that with an education campaign as well. But aside from focusing on just kids and elderly, next slide, we also wanted to, again, focus on our equity community. And so we lowered speeds in the Tenderloin district on all the streets. And if you ask those folks, and we didn't just do it, to Veronica's point, because we as engineers thought that we should be done. We asked folks that live there, what's important to you? What do you need us to fix? And what we heard is, I live in a traffic sewer. That's how all the streets feel to me. Please, can you please slow down the vehicles? So we lowered the speed limit in the Tenderloin and, of course, paired that with an education campaign. Next slide. All right. Engineering to, slow speeds. You all know these: speed cushions, roundabouts, traffic circles. Next slide. Yeah. This is what I'm proud of. Slow Streets program. During the pandemic, people had to get outside. They had to exercise. They had to socialize. And so we implemented a Slow Streets program where we are prioritizing people walking, rolling, and biking over vehicles. It is a really huge cultural change, a real huge shift in how people view the roads. And it was controversial on some streets, but mostly people loved it. And when the pandemic was over, it became a permanent program in San Francisco where I have 19 corridors that are Slow Streets corridors. And you can see that they're identified, they're branded, because you have a soft hit post that identifies it. They all look similar throughout the city, but then we have stewards that adopt their streets and do little variations that make it their own. Next slide. We mentioned joy, that streets aren't just for transportation, they're for bringing community together. Next slide. And we were fortunate enough to get grants to get local artists to design murals on these streets that then residents and businesses came out to paint together. And this is what it looks like. For days and sometimes weeks on end, folks' kids would come out and paint these murals on the slow streets. Next slide. And this is the outcome. This is on Lion Street. This is what it looks like from above. And this is not the only street. There are a couple more in the city, and we're working on this. Incredible way to bring people together and to get to know their neighbors. Next slide. And I'm proud to say that I will be the first California city in March doing speed safety cameras. I know lots of people in the nation already do it, so I know I'm a little bit behind. But we will have 33 locations with speed safety cameras coming in March. Very excited to see how those work to slow people down. Next slide. All right. How do I know this stuff works? It is because we have an incredible evaluation program. Whenever we do quick builds or capital projects or little treatments, we do an assessment and we study it and we count things and we figure out if they really work. Next slide. And there's statistics here on the side. They'll be sent out. You can read about them. But we see an increase in bicycling. We see the speed slowing down. With the left turn treatments, we do see vehicles slowing down. 75% reduction in vehicles that were turning at 15 miles or less. Huge improvements. Next slide. And we see vehicular behavior change. People are slowing down a lot. So the data doesn't lie. It shows us that where we make investments, there are improvements. Where I have built quick builds, we have seen a 30% reduction in severe collisions and fatalities for pedestrians and bicyclists. I have a lot more work to do because last year was terrible in terms of fatalities for San Francisco and Vision Zero. It was rough. It was one of the highest years I've had, frankly, in my tenure in the city. So it was difficult. And I could spend like a whole 3 hours pontificating as to why that is. But where we make improvements, we see results. Next slide. This is what I want to close with. Recipe for success. A couple of things here. First is data. We all know that. Second is funding. You do need money. That's just the reality of it. But I want to talk about the third thing, which is partnerships, which is another theme that we all are hearing today. And I want to talk about the three-legged stool of partnership that I think works. Number one is your elected official. John, thank you for being here, and thank you to all the elected officials that are here today. I know you guys are busy, and the fact that you're investing in this day means a lot to all of us that work in this industry. Having elected officials that are fearless, that understand what needs to be done for safety, and that have spine is critical. Number two, advocates. Those help too, and you got to have a good relationship because they can help you work to bring people along like your elected officials. And number three, and this is probably the most important one, it is the people in the neighborhood, and that can be your community-based organization, your chamber of commerce, your church, your mosque, your synagogue, your neighborhood association, your HOA. You have to work with the folks together. You have to partner with them. And it is only when you do these kind of partnerships that, maybe it's not such a street fight. Maybe you work on something together, because working on something together builds trust. And I have to tell you, I do this work for safety, but I also do this work meaningfully to me personally to build trust in government and to build trust in our institutions. Trust in government has been plummeting for the last 40 years, going like this, and it's at an all-time low, I think. And it is time that we collectively put our minds together, work together with the community to rebuild trust in government and our institutions. It is how we move forward. Thank you.
Is the monitor working? All right, good afternoon, Florida. It's great to be back. I served Florida for 34 years, but I did move on. I wanted a bigger canvas, and I hope to share with you the insights I've gained throughout all of North America, many of my communities. But the real emphasis I want to give during my presentation is we've made huge advances in active transportation and safety in general, but we also have dug a very deep pit that we're going to have to figure out how to get out of. But if we focus on the vulnerable road users, it's going to make streets safer for absolutely everyone, whatever mode they choose. And the cities that are doing the most to advance walking and bicycling and transit are becoming the safest cities to drive. And historically, when we first had the first traffic engineer in America, William Phelps Eno, he figured it out that we should never build a road that doesn't work for pedestrians and bicyclists, and back then, equestrians. The cities have done the best to do that, are making the greatest advances. I want to focus on health. I represent a health organization now. It's called Blue Zones. If you haven't seen the network series, it's really worth watching. But what Dan Buettner, the founder, did is he went to all the hotspots in the world where people just naturally were living longer, healthier, happier lives. And his big premise that I was able to help implement is to reward the short trip and provide for active transportation. It turns out that only 20% of how long and how well and how happy we live is involved in our genetics. Everything else is in our control, but a huge part is in the built environment. The first community we worked in, Albert Lee, Minnesota, was looked like this. This is after we rebuilt Main Street, but then the Minnesota DOT, who owned this road, said, we're just going to resurface, we're not going to do anything more. But the city was so organized by then that they said, no, you're not. Take your money and spend it in someone else's community. Well, the DOT cannot do that. And so with a vision and a really well-organized community, they dropped out all the lanes except for 2. They dropped crashes 73%. Just by being prepared as a community. And they also, for those they could track, reduced the healthcare cost 49%. So the next blue zone community we worked in, Muscatine, Iowa, population 20,000. Because of change in climate, the railroad now floods every single year. They have to raise the railroad, and now they have to raise the road. We worked with them, and the road now looks like this. They received over $750 million in new monies because of the changes they were doing to embrace health. Another town, Farmington, New Mexico, they had more lanes than they needed, but their downtown was failing. We did a road diet. Other names are applied as well. And today, that road is making buku more bucks because they made it safer, more comfortable, more welcoming for people to come and spend time. The big concept I want to get across to those of you who have not heard this term is target speed. How many of you have heard the term? Okay, so it's coming pretty well. But for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, we set the design of the street for the speed people should be going based on the type of street. And the lower the speed, obviously, the safer the street is. And so any given street, we might have a section of speeds, but the areas that we want to recover the fastest and the most need the lowest speeds, horse and buggy speed. And so the target speed of the street on the top only has to carry 12,000 cars, and it's got 7 lanes to do that. The lower street, which is real close to Berkeley, it's Albany, California, it's only got 4 lanes, and it has to move 45,000 cars. But the street is doing a much better job of being multimodal. So here's an example. How fast would you assume people would drive with this street? Yeah, and that's pretty much across the board, and it's true. But what if you did this? What if you did this? What if you did this? Here comes a big one. What if you terminate the vista? And then engineers and planners have done all they do. Now the developer steps in, and they'll really brings down the speed by putting the buildings where they belong. And so we see that this really can happen very effectively, very well. I want to show just a few of the tools. Other speakers have shared with you, but I want to give you some additional details. Every intersection we rework, we try to get in a more compact neighborhood. This is what's going to really reduce the crashes. And a lot of the treatments that you'll see in the presentations do that. Davis, California did it in an outstanding fashion. Their speeds came down. The safety went way up as a result of doing this. But I want to show the science behind this, kinetics. Yeah, for a 4-cross intersection signals or stop signs, you can see on the right the kinetic value. The alternative is to do a roundabout and take a look at the kinetics for a roundabout. Roundabouts eliminate about 90% of fatals. They're bringing the speeds down to what is appropriate for many community cases. Florida was a leader in roundabouts. We put in one of the first modern roundabouts over in the Gulf Coast side. I later moved to Washington State, and Steve Sugg put in the first roundabout in the state of Washington. I believe Washington is now up to over 300 roundabouts. One of my favorite projects is Bird Rock, California. This used to be a 5-lane road, as you can see. After our work there, the street came down to this. It really powered up all the businesses, made walking much safer. The noise level for the street dropped 74%. And mid-block, a couple of tools, Fort Lauderdale by the Sea. This also went through a lane reduction. And you can see, and by the way, one of my principles is when you provide for bicyclists, you're helping the pedestrian. You're creating a buffer. You're slowing traffic speeds. We can do all kinds of things to help pedestrians get across the street, including mid-block crossings. I love what the engineers did here. They widened the gutter pan, the concrete portion, and made the lanes look like they were only 8 feet wide. So we've learned so many tools. One of my favorite remakes is in Nashville, North Carolina. City workers were getting killed trying to get to their cars on the other side of the street, but we knew we couldn't take the lanes away until we fixed the intersection. It's a partnership. So this is what ended up resulting for getting the pedestrians across the street. We went down to 1 lane in each direction, but we slowed the speeds. And one of the ways that we had to apply and did was to put in a roundabout at this location. So do you see the partnership that comes together? You need to work on more than one little site. You need to work on the entire greater area. So speed control has become my mantra as I do my work around the country. And I like to work in the neighborhoods first. It's the area where we see the greatest reductions. We have so many tools. You're already applying many of these, but it's important to understand how these tools work together in concert. One of my favorite things to apply, and we've been doing it quite well in a few cities in Florida, is to put in gateways. Announce to the driver that the section you're about to enter, the speed is very different than what you just left behind. Watercolors and the Panhandle did a beautiful job of this. I've visited a number of times, and the speeds are actually lower than their target speed because it's so beautiful, it's so attractive, and so functional. There are many guidelines now to find throughout the nation. Florida has some of the best. But to me, Washington DOT is ahead of everyone else right now. They have narrow streets. They prefer 10 feet for their minimum default. And then to go up to 11 if the conditions call for that, but never 12. And you can see one of the Washington streets where we've gotten in different sidewalks on different sides, but we got the bike lanes, we got the medians, and very safe crossings. In Clearwater, Florida, we not only took out 2 lanes on this road, but we were able to colorize the center lane. Everything we do should be to get the speeds to come down, including dropping the width of the radius on the corners and bring down the speeds and apply the standards that have always existed in ASHTA, the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials. Allow trucks on minor traffic roads to go over the center line so that you can get down to a reasonable size and scale. And I hope I picked up enough minutes that we're back on schedule. And thank you, everyone. Keep up the great work.
Dan, that was amazing. Target speed, finish ahead of schedule. Really great. Way to go. Slido, you've been using it all day, maybe yesterday, is your way to send a question in. And if it works like it should, I'll get it right here on my screen, and I can combine them if necessary, paraphrase, and get it going. But we've got a great one we can use for a lightning round to begin. And it's not a question any of you will be hearing for the first time. 20 years ago, we would hear, does there have to be a trade-off between environmental performance and quality of life on one hand and economic progress on the other hand? And we would all in this room say, no, we can have both of those things. Now, the question is, does there have to be a trade-off between economic progress and displacement of vulnerable populations? So the question was, can you name a successful example? And let's stick to the topic and think of an example that has street revitalization or change involved, where there was a successful effort to prevent displacement for legacy residents. And John, you want to go first?
Sure. I'll give two quick answers. One, this is a really important question. I ran for office because housing was a very personal part of my life. I was housing insecure as a young person, so housing was the reason I ran for government. And I actually ran a housing bond in 2018, the largest per capita affordable housing bond in the state of California's history. And with it, we've built hundreds of homes for people who are of a working class nature, low income, fixed income. We're the only city in the East Bay that actually had its black population increase in the Bay Area in the last census. So I believe you have to make those investments, and the government has to be a market player in doing that. So when it comes to the transportation side of things, we have very robust policies around keeping people, placekeeping, and keeping people in their homes. And as the chair of the county's Transportation Commission, I undertook a year-long process with my commission to develop a race and equity action plan. And I think every transportation agency should do one, a race and equity action plan. And through it, we learned so many things. We came up with 43 strategies for how we were going to implement and not make the same mistakes of bulldozing neighborhoods and communities that were black business districts, Chinatowns, and putting all kinds of things that took people from suburbia to jobs downtown. We can make the same mistake with bike lanes. You can make the same mistake, because if the community doesn't have investment in that and doesn't feel bought into that. So the most important strategy we had was, before any idea hits paper, we have to spend time in the community to find out what their unmet needs are. And that changed the way we develop projects from the beginning. So the projects aren't part of the displacement process or conversation anymore, because they're actually projects that reflect what the community wants. And when they learn that there are other tools that can help them technically bring something that they didn't even imagine for themselves in, they're more invested in it, and we find that the process is even easier to go through the public process in the end.
Terrific. Viktoriya?
It's a really important question, and we've certainly failed before. We did a red-only lane in the Mission District, and boy, oh boy, was the Latinx community really upset with us. And I gotta tell you guys, we did that a long time ago, and to this day, they cannot forgive my agency for it. And anytime we go to that community to do any project, they're like, we don't trust you. So we've been really thoughtful with our new up-and-coming bike and roll plan, which is scheduled for adoption on the 18th of February. I'm a little nervous, but it's gonna happen. But the way that we developed that plan is through doing community action planning. So we went to our equity communities that I showed on that map, and we did 2 years of engagement and actually paid community organizations to do this work together with us and tell us what they need. So we weren't like, oh, I think we did an analysis and we need a bike lane here to connect the network. We asked them, what do you guys need? And we heard all kinds of things. Why are you talking to us about bike lanes when the sidewalk is broken? We heard that today too, right? And so while I don't figure out how to do sidewalks in the city, I can text my director of public works and talk to her about it, right? Because this is what I'm hearing, and this is how I'm gonna gain trust with the communities to build some transportation projects. So I'm proud of this work, but to be determined, we're figuring it out.
One of my favorites is Charlotte, North Carolina. The downtown had 4 complete divisions. 3 of the 4 were pretty wealthy. The 4th was not, and the homes were really run down. The city realized how important that was, and they put all kinds of energies in, rebuilt every single house because they all needed it, but wanted to keep everyone in place. The other thing they did, they added a park, they added a school, and traffic calmed all the streets. I think that's a good example. Charlotte, North Carolina.
It sounds like the solution in a lot of those cases is communication, not just investment or dedication to the problem, but communicating at every level. So the next question is also about communication, and it goes back to a topic all 3 of you mentioned in one way or another, and that is speed. I think, Viktoriya, you reminded us about the speed of a collision having a lot to do with the likelihood of a fatality. Although, you know, the 5% likelihood fatality at 20 miles per hour also strikes me as being too many, right? And you said safety comes first, Mayor Bauters, and Dan, you spoke about target speeds. So a couple of the questions that we got in were about speed, exactly this. There's a perception among our greater audience of community that slowing down the speed is going to create an undue or unacceptable delay in their life. And then, of course, that's all reinforced by conventional traffic engineering, level of service analysis, and so on, which adds up the delay in seconds at intersections as a measure for, I guess, good versus bad. So when you have to communicate to someone who's not one of us, what do you say to get them excited about the idea that slow is beautiful? You want to go first, Dan? We'll just
Sure.
reverse the order.
First of all, slowing does not mean it takes longer to get to your destination.
Exactly.
When we did Bird Rock, and I want to say it was 2.5 miles long, the speeds had been 40 and 50 miles an hour. After the treatments, the speeds were about 19 through the entire corridor, and people were getting home sooner because we weren't stopping them. We were applying the right tools to keep them in motion with fewer lanes and no stop controls and no signals.
I talked to them about the kids and the elderly, and I just asked them, kind of like what you wrote in that email to the parent, to the angry parent, John, and I asked them, do you mind slowing down just 5 miles an hour because that makes a difference of whether your kid or your mom or your grandma or your friends' kids are severely injured forever or are, God forbid, killed?
Mic drop.
Okay.
Beautiful.
I think the hard part of the question was, how do you get people excited? I don't know that you can get them excited. But I do workshops and longer presentations literally just about this issue about communication. And I'll try to give one brief example. One of the things I teach people, elected officials and other planners and city officials, is to understand the difference between when you're having a conversation with somebody about facts or feelings. So many people come to the public comment, they're upset, they're telling you what they're thinking, and then people go, well, did you know our data says blah, blah, and this and this? And it's like, we didn't really listen to them, right? Because they're not talking to us about the facts, they're talking about feelings. So we had a very significant project that's reducing speed. We had 60 to 80 people come. They were mostly upset about it, right? And the first person, it's a town hall, I'm doing a town hall, and the lady's like, nobody bikes on this road anyways. You're gonna slow all this down. We're gonna be late to work. I'm not gonna come. You're gonna get rid of the parking. I'm not gonna get my nails done in your city anymore because the parking won't be outside the building, And so I know, as the active listener, I know that that's not factually true, right? So I say back to her, I said, so what I heard is, you feel this isn't needed. She's like, yes. You feel this will be inconvenient. Yes. You feel this will be economically damaging to our community. Yes. So I've captured your feelings correctly. Yes. Here's how I feel. I feel that moms and dads should come home from work alive. I feel children should have independence and learn about their community on their own. I feel that every other person in this town should have an equitable choice to move safely the same way you and I do. Those are my feelings. It's really hard to argue with somebody. I'm not the condescending asshole who's saying, here's my stats.
Right.
I'm speaking feelings to feelings, and whether or not they are excited about my feelings or agree with them is not actually the exercise. The exercise is telling all the other people listening, right, that one, I am listening to you, but two, there are more feelings than the ones we have. And so at the end of the meeting, what I will say is, I've heard a lot about what you think or what you feel, but I was elected to make a decision. And at the end of the day, I go back to my narrative, which I had in my presentation about safety. Convenience is a luxury item for people who already have safety. There is nothing convenient about being unsafe. So when we have safety for everybody, I will focus more on convenience, but with the choice I have to make today, I'm prioritizing the safety choice. And I don't get people excited, but I definitely get people who come up to me afterwards and say, I didn't think of it that way. And I might not agree with you all the time, but I actually appreciate your decision. So that's how I try to do it.
I think we just got our quote for the day. That was
And if I can add something.
convenience is a luxury item.
Yeah, and something you reminded me of yesterday, John, when we talked is empathy. Listening with empathy. Really important.
Dan, you had one more point?
Yeah, I wanted to add one more point. Walter Kulash, a Florida engineer, now retired, who I consider the greatest engineer I've ever had a pleasure to work with, made this point that the more beautiful you make the road, the less the motors are going to be concerned with how long it takes. And truly, as we add beauty, which I know you have focused on in your writings, Victor, the more motorists are going to appreciate what we're doing to become modal friendly, to become safe. And it just absolutely works. Everywhere I've worked, the most beautiful roads are the most pleasurable, enjoyable, and fewest complaints on speed.
Fantastic. Well, let's thank our panelists, contestant 1, 2, and 3.
Good job.